In the months leading up to Budget 2026, India's salaried workers were expecting a lifeline to help manage the rising cost of living. Instead, the budget left income tax slabs and the standard deduction completely untouched. The financial sector's reaction was swift. Within hours, the Sensex dropped by more than 1,500 points, reflecting deep concerns about domestic demand and a squeezed middle class. This lack of relief points to a highly concentrated burden. In a country of over 1.4 billion people, only about 1 to 2 they are taxed at rates designed for the wealthy, while coping with the shrinking purchasing power usually associated with the poor. Corporations are taxed on their profits. They deduct rent, equipment, and employee costs before the government takes its cut. Salaried workers, however, are taxed on their gross income. The tax system does not deduct their unavoidable costs of living before calculating what they owe. Let's look at this chart breaking down the financial burden on a salaried employee to see exactly how this math plays out. The first subtraction is immediate, a 25% slice taken directly out for income tax before the paycheck even hits a bank account. Then we look at the rest section. What remains is quickly consumed by the dark blue slice, rent and utilities. Over the last decade, property prices in major urban centers have climbed sharply, absorbing 25% of a typical salaried income and leaving a dwindling pool of money for everything else. That remaining pool includes the light blue slice, which covers necessities like healthcare and education. According to the National Sample Survey Office, urban private school fees have risen by 169% over the last 10 years, far outpacing any salary increases. Step by step, the paycheck is systematically drained. The current tax code treats basic survival expenses not as necessary deductions, but as post-tax liabilities, leaving middle-class households with zero margin for error. Official figures claim average real incomes have grown by 50% in recent years, but data from the periodic labor force survey tells a different story. For roughly 5 years, nominal wages grew by only 1 to 5%. Because inflation ran higher than that, the actual purchasing power of workers in the formal sector declined. Economists call this a K-shaped recovery. Rather than the whole economy rising together, one segment shoots upward, while the other points straight down. The organized sector is actively expanding, but it is doing so at the direct expense of the unorganized sector. At the top arm of the K, corporate profits are reaching new highs. Large companies, especially those producing fast-moving consumer goods, are aggressively expanding their market share and swallowing up smaller competitors. At the bottom arm of the K, the workforce faces a severe decline in job quality. The number of unpaid workers more than doubled from 40 million in 2017 to 95 million in 2022. Millions more have been pushed into low-paying self-employment just to survive. High top-line GDP numbers mask this reality. Financial growth is isolated at the top, while the salaried middle class, the exact demographic funding the government's tax base, is being financially exhausted. Let's look back at the pie chart. After the taxes, the rent, and the school fees are paid, we are left with the final purple slice, a meager 15% margin for savings. Because this margin is incredibly thin, unexpected costs like a medical emergency or a sudden rent hike instantly push households into the red. Families are increasingly relying on personal loans and credit card debt to cover the gap and maintain their baseline standard of living. When millions of households stretch their finances this thin, it becomes a national economic threat. Unlike China, which relies heavily on manufacturing and exporting goods to other countries, India does not have an export-driven economy. Instead, it relies on domestic demand. This diagram visualizes India's overall GDP. Notice that a massive 61.5% of the entire economy is driven by private final consumption expenditure. That is simply the money regular citizens spend on goods and services. This is the consumption conundrum. Private investment has been stuck at roughly 12% of GDP for nearly a decade, meaning the country relies almost entirely on citizen consumption to grow. But as taxes stay high and wages stagnate, the middle class loses its purchasing power. They buy less, and that directly starves the primary driver of the national economy. Keeping the tax burden heavy on salaried workers comes with a massive cost. By draining the disposable income of the middle class, policymakers are systematically cutting off the fuel supply to the exact engine required for India's economic growth.